Scallion with us. Gordon Michael Scallion is a legendary figure, a futurist, a teacher of consciousness studies, the author of the best-selling book Notes from the Cosmos, a futurist's insight into the world of dream, prophecy, and intuition. His website is matrixinstitute.com. He started out in electronics, and in 1979, he experienced a health crisis that changed his life. And later on, you will hear probably more about what happened to Gordon Michael Scallion than you ever have before. Many of the insights documented in his book and in Intuitive Flash come true to such an extent that he's become a legend. And in fact, back in 1994, he was already warning about what was going to happen in the Indian Ocean and saying that this would open a door to future Earth changes. We'll certainly be talking about that. Welcome to the program, Gordon Michael Scallion. I had a whole list of questions for you, but I was so fascinated by something I saw on matrixinstitute.com, your website, just a few moments ago, about physical sensations. There are, among them me and many other people, are having strange physical sensations right now. A reader of the Intuitive Flash of your newsletter wrote in about lower back problems and strange pains and relating them to Earth changes, in my mind, for the first time. Could you talk a little bit, expand a little bit on this?
Sure. Probably no other subject has driven more letters and emails to our institute than this issue that you're talking about. We get a lot of correspondence, of course, for people wanting to know what the future is like, but that number is not as large as the number of people who are feeling unsettled. And there's a peak to these things, that they kind of reach a crescendo, then drop off. And I've noticed the cycle over 25 years. And it seems that typically anywhere from a few minutes to as much as a week before a seismic event or a stellar event, such as a aurora borealis, northern lights effect, or some kind of a passage of a comet, certain lunar aspects, the sunspot cycle. All of these things seem to trigger Earth energies that are moving through all of us. And just prior to, like I said, up to a week, these things get amplified. And the animals are the first to react to these kind of things. So I have several veterinarians and people who work at animal hospitals who are in contact with me, and they feed me data and actually see the trend. So we react to these things. Now, this energy is always flowing through us. It's not like this energy comes and goes like on our birthday. It's constantly, 24/7, passing through our bodies. But when it gets amplified, the strength of the forces that are moving through our body increased by a factor of 10, 100, 1,000. And as it moves through our body and up our spinal column, whatever part of our body is not in balance, we tend to carry our stress, most of us, in our neck and shoulders and lower back. We tend to have headaches and migraines at a pattern and a frequency we don't understand. But if we look at some of the data of quakes and other events I spoke about, we'll see that there is a pattern here. And this pattern is triggering us. Now, we are in a cycle window of unprecedented changes in our Earth. We see it with weather. We see it with volcanism. We see it, the most recent horrific event in the Indian Ocean. And all of these things are pointing to even greater events to come. And therefore, I fully suspect that more and more people are going to be reporting these physical sensations.
Well, it's interesting that animals, like here in California, people always seem to rely on their animals to warn them of impending Earth changes. And of course, in the recent event in the Indian Ocean, the animals reacted and moved to higher ground while people were oblivious to it, except for the Morgan Gypsies and some of the Andaman Islanders who were living in very traditional ways and sensed something immediately. Now, tell us, is there any way for us to kind of pick up on what is happening with animals, like when cats and dogs all start disappearing, for example, before an earthquake?
Well, animals in China in particular, they use certain animals as indicators for seismic events. It's one part of a battery. It's not the only thing they depend upon, but they do look at it. And there's lots of research going on. Animals, because they are in survival mode always, are very attuned to what's going on about them. They're not flouted with all of the emotional baggage that we all have. And so for us, in order to get a clearer sense about where we are and what's going on around us, we have to kind of pull back and take a few minutes each day to kind of get centered. Now, the simplest things to do would be, a few minutes of meditation will do it. Prayer does it. But, sometime every day, pick a time. And I recommend taking 7 minutes. I have found that's a magical number. And if you do it every day at the same time, just sitting quietly, so you kind of tune everything out, it kind of sends a message to our subconscious mind that says, this is a time period for attunement. This is contemplation. This is where my time period to get back in touch. And the benefits, of course, are is that we will reduce our stress and we'll open our intuitive channels up to get more of the answers that we're all searching for. But at the same token, it will also kind of tune our physical bodies to become more aware of what's around us and what's happening.
I've heard that classified ads for dogs and cats, lost animals, lost pets, are an actual indicator of an impending earthquake. Is that true?
It is. There's a lot of research, especially in California. There are several people who are tracking lost pet classifieds. So they may look at 100 different classified ads. And the first place that people do when they lose a pet is they post an ad, lost my pet cat or dog or whatever. And so you can see those things will spike up. And when they spike up, it's an indication or a trend that something is going to happen. Now, we don't know where, we don't know the magnitude, we don't know the date, but we know that we're in a window of it. So it's kind of like an indicator. The higher the number of lost pets, the more we can look at the classifieds in a specific area. We can draw some conclusions, though admittedly it's still very, very relative. We're just saying that here in Southern California we're getting a lot of this, so therefore an event might be occurring in the very, very near future in Southern California. But it's just one more piece of a battery of equipment.
Now, the earthquakes that occurred in the Indian Ocean, there are actually two. There was first an 8.4 that occurred south of Tasmania toward the Antarctic, and then a couple of days later there was this monstrous 9.0 earthquake that has caused such a terrible loss of life. And let me talk a little bit about a prediction that you made in 1994. In that year, you predicted that something would happen in the Indian Ocean at some point. And I actually, oddly enough, remember that. I remember that from your newsletter. And so tell us now what is unfolding at this point.
Actually, the first time that I released that was in September of '92.
I wasn't aware of you in September of '92.
Yeah, and it was and at that time it was a very limited audience that we had, and then it was again republished in '94, and then it appeared on my future map of what the world will look like later. And the reason that I published those was I wanted to kind of set a pattern for early warning signs. My sense is that if we can add one more thing to the battery of evaluation of things that are going to happen, if a series of things start to happen, we can say that this pattern looks like it might continue. Because what I was seeing way out in the future was, things that were more severe than the Indian Ocean quake that just occurred. So my sense was, let's put out a bunch of things that we see, and let's see if they happen. Now, in this particular case, when I see an event, it appears as a vision. It's like watching those movies like, when I first got started, I would see things like movies. That's the only way I can describe them. Sometimes there'd be 3 separate movies in front of my eyes, and one movie would be very colorful, and the next movie might be kind of muted colors, and then the third one would be gray. And it was the same scene, slightly different sometimes, but the same issue, and they were different colors. And then I eventually realized that what I was looking at was probabilities. If it was bright color and I only saw one screen, the chances were pretty strong the event was going to happen. If it was gray, it meant that it wasn't going to happen. And then if you looked at it again a year later, we could see what the probabilities were. It's either the same or it might have changed. Most of the things have not changed. The Indian Ocean quake, I thought, because I was seeing it back in '92, that event was around the corner. But here it was 13 years later that it occurred. But when I saw it, it was when I wrote about it, it was kind of eerie, even for me, having lived with this for 25 years. Let me just read you a very short piece. So I said, this is what I said in '82. I have been warning for 10 years now that if geophysical activity in the region of the Indian Ocean followed by a tidal wave, and specifically into the area of Colombo, Sri Lanka.
Good Lord.
Then, within a short period of time, I'll just excerpt down here rather than read the whole thing, and talked about the tidal wave, how fast it was going to go, where it was going to go. But that was like a warning sign, one of the final big warning signs, that when that event happens, then we have to look for things in other parts of the world to also follow, and follow relatively shortly, such as the west coast of the United States. In
just a moment, we're going to look at those very things with Gordon Michael Scallion. This is Whitley Strieber for Dreamland. We'll be right back. During this first commercial break, I would like to let you subscribers know that there is a special sale on in the unknowncountry.com store that adds a 5% discount to everything you buy. So as a subscriber, you get not only your 10% subscriber discount, an additional 5% discount, plus the usual volume discounts. You could be buying from the Unknown Country store at a very substantial savings. So there will be no more commercial announcements during this. There will be no more announcements during the subscriber version of Dreamland, but I do urge you to click on the store tab and take advantage right now. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back with Gordon Michael Scallion, and we were just talking before we left the air about the changes that may be heralded by what happened in the Indian Ocean a few sad weeks ago. So, Gordon, if you would just continue on, what do you think is unfolding from this point?
Well, we're in obviously we're in a very high seismic window. We're also in a window where I see consciousness rising to higher levels. By higher levels, I'm referring to the fact that we can see this with the outpouring for the victims of the Indian Ocean region. We can see what's happening globally. So there's two things going on. One is that we as a society still have a lot of problems and a lot of issues, but we are growing as a society. At the same time that's going on, the energy that's pushing us to higher levels of consciousness is also stirring the planet up. So the kind of things that I see is the Earth is being transformed. It's the only way I can literally describe it. And we will experience more and more of these kind of changes. Like a 9/0 quake was almost an unheard of thing. We've had one before in Alaska, but it's kind of like an unheard of thing. Yet I, back in 80, 81, said that we would be seeing quakes of 9, 10, 11, and 12. And those numbers are just, unheard of.
Unheard of. But scientists would tell you that more than a 10 is probably impossible, in fact. But you're saying it could be even worse.
Yeah, they are saying that. But what science says now, and what science says in 2 years as technology changes, is being rewritten. We're constantly, the faster we move, the more we rewrite what we believe was in the past and what we will be in the future. We're in that stage now where we're reevaluating so many things, especially scientifically, and we're just going to need to, patiently move through this time period. It's like the world of psychic phenomena is still an unproven and it's still an unaccepted realm. It's seen as entertainment for the most part on television and other places. Yet in the hearts of most people, if you ask them, they will say, I sense there's something to this thing called intuition, and I also sense there's something into things from other planets, and ETs, alien, all that. They all sense that there's something else, and yet science would say that's not true. Yet each year that goes by, we have to rewrite it. So we're going to be rewriting history as far as this planet is concerned, and we still don't know scientifically, for example, what's in the center of the Earth. We have everything from it's hollow to the fact that it's solid to something else. So we're still trying to discover what that is. In time, we'll learn more, and the things that I'm seeing, I think, is going to push us to actually learn more.
Well, tell us a little bit about what you see, what you feel is there.
What I did is I took about 10 years of visions dealing with what I saw, what the world would look like when it kind of calmed down. And I initially saw a time period from 91 through 2001 as a time period where I felt that there would be accelerated earth changes, and that some of the major ones would occur within that window. And a lot of them did not. A lot of the warning signs occurred, but the major ones, the really major ones, did not occur until last year. Then they started to occur. So the difficulty is when an intuitive looks at something from the other side, there is not a time reference. It's not like that you can look for a calendar or a map. Sometimes, I was able to predict Hurricane Andrew to the exact day, the velocity of the winds, the damage and dollar amounts. And the reason I was able to do that is because I had a vision. I saw the newspaper headline, and I read it, and I copied it down. That's a rarity. I wish I saw that all the time, but I didn't. Same thing with the Landers quake. Again, I saw a newspaper ad in a vision, copied it, wrote it down, and were able to accurately predict its epicenter and magnitude. So the things that are further out there in the future, I would say here within the next decade, we would see changes where the United States, for example, would perhaps lose as much as a third of its landmass and really be divided into two, the eastern United States and the western, where the Mississippi becoming a huge waterway that separates the two, and that the West Coast, Phoenix up to Colorado, really becoming the new West Coast, and that the East Coast remaining pretty much the same, except that maybe 10, 20 miles inland loses some of its coastline down there. So you see those changes. You see I saw good portions of Europe underwater. Most of Great Britain, in fact, and the Scandinavian areas, I saw them underwater. And at the same time, I saw new land that coming up from the ocean, off the Atlantic. Huge major landmass out there, perhaps the size of Texas. I saw it rising between the Canary Islands and the Bahamas in that region. I saw Africa split. If you would put the letter Y over Africa, and then see that being divided, Africa being divided into three places with the Y representing waterways.
Wow.
And if you look at my map, if you go online, I do have a map you can click on, and you look at the Indian Ocean, you'll see that all of the islands that are no longer there today, currently. But if you look at the map that I did, over a decade ago, you'll see that those are underwater and that the land masses throughout here have changed. So now we're seeing some part of that map being fulfilled. But eventually, and again, by the end of this decade, or let's say by the year 2012, I think most of the changes will have been complete, and then we'll have a new ecosystem for the planet. We'll have new weather patterns, new climate. The planet will be warmer than it ever has been before. Well, not ever has been before, but it'll be warmer. Where climate zones will change. Where it was cold, it'll be warm, and vice versa. And we'll see that a lot of things that all of us feel are available now, such as longevity, fossil fuel technology, cosmic energy driving things, psychic healings. All of these things will be commonplace by that time. So we're looking at literally a new race of people, a new society.
Because such events would have obviously have reduced the number of human beings on the earth dramatically, because a lot of people won't survive that.
Whenever there's any kind of a change, whether it's a war or whether it's a geophysical event, there's loss of life, and then there's also a rebirth, and the population. If you believe in the concept of reincarnation, then I see, when I look ahead to the year 2022-7, 22-8, 21-11, 21-12, I see a lot of returning people who are here now, returning back to populate the world in this new, what I would call, like a millennium of peace is the way I can describe it, because I don't see conflicts, I don't see wars. I see a kind of a loving society, something like we would all want in our hearts, but wonder if that ever could be possible.
It's not
my visions, I see it.
It's not so different from the Christian vision of the post-apocalyptic world, is it?
No, it's not. And if we look at Native American, the Mayan, or any other cultures, we'll see that there's some similar prophetic writings that indicate similar things. So wherever you are in the world, there's somebody who's also getting the same information.
There was a time when I would have just dismissed this out of hand as being too extreme and not scientific. However, it's not true anymore. It is scientifically, there's a lot of support for it for two reasons. The first one is that the great ice masses of the world are melting faster than we can possibly imagine. As we speak, there are icebergs appearing off the coast of New Zealand for the first time in 57 years, and only for the second time in recorded history, because of the warming that is taking place in the Antarctic. And we're having wild weather in the United States right now, but in the lower 50. But in Alaska, it's one of the warmest Januaries on record. The whole place is melting. Greenland is melting much, much more rapidly than the most pessimistic scientists would have believed 5 years ago. Now, if Greenland and the Antarctic melt, the ocean, the water levels of this world will rise dramatically, along with a redistribution of mass on the planet that will destabilize the whole crust, meaning that exactly what you are predicting will begin to occur. A combination of higher water levels everywhere and an extraordinarily unstable planet. And frankly, I think you're seeing the future. I think you really are. And when we get back, folks, we're going to ask Gordon Michael Scallion the ace question: why him? Why is he seeing the future? Why would he make predictions like this years ago when there was absolutely no scientific evidence that this could ever happen? And then it comes into a situation where it begins to unfold, and science, following Gordon's vision, begins to show us it could be real. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. During this commercial break, this first commercial break, I would like to let you subscribers know that there is a special sale on in the unknowncountry.com store that adds a 5% discount to everything you buy. So as a subscriber, you get not only your 10% subscriber discount, an additional 5% discount, plus the usual volume discounts. You could be buying from the Unknown Country store at a very substantial savings. So there will be no more commercial announcements during this. There will be no more announcements during the subscriber version of Dreamland, but I do urge you to click on the store tab and take advantage right now. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back with Gordon Michael Scallion. And Gordon, you, in explaining yourself, as I mentioned briefly in the introduction, you talk about an event that happened to you in 1979. You don't often get a chance when you're on the air to describe what actually did happen that changed your life so dramatically and sort of opened this window for you.
In my background, it was electronics, and prior to 79. In 79, I, in a process of a meeting, lost my voice. And I describe it as, in my book, as somebody turning a switch, and my voice didn't work. There was no pain. But I scared everybody I was with in that meeting, and I ended up in the hospital for test and observation. And while I was in the hospital, I saw a whole series of visions.
Yes.
And the visions were like watching three separate movies. And on one screen, I could see the past, ancient civilizations, even flying craft. So it was very Grecian. And the center one, I would see kind of things currently. Newspapers would fly up, headlines, things going on. And then on the one on the right screen was kind of looking at the Earth from space and seeing the Earth itself kind of shifting its position in space. And then watching water redistributing itself around. And so that event was the beginning of all of it. They found out in the hospital that there really was nothing wrong with me. I assumed that I was seeing the things I was seeing because they had hooked me up with a couple of IVs in my arms, and I assumed that something in the IVs, I was having a reaction to it. And that's how I got through this 30-minute movie melee. And the next morning, my voice came back. I went through some tests, and they suggested that I needed to go see another type of a doctor, that they couldn't find anything wrong with me. And of course, that type of a doctor was a psychiatrist.
Of course.
And I did. And I went and I hooked up with someone who, as it turns out, was a sailor. I also had a sailboat, and we got talking in our sessions. And he said, "Why don't we do our sessions while we're sailing?" He said, and I said, "Fine." So we went out, and he said, "Look at," he says, "let me write down the things you're seeing." He says, "And then maybe I'll be able to piece something together. What's wrong with you?" And he said, "But I don't think you're crazy." He says, "He says maybe you got some issues, and that's what's causing this." He says, "Sometimes people have dreams, during the day, daydreaming." He says, "Maybe." He says, "Do you have an interest in the future?" And I said, "No, only what the markets will do and stuff like that."
Yeah.
He said, "How about the past?" And I said, "No." I said, I really want to look to the present and maybe the near future." And anyways, after about 2 or 3 weeks, I get a call late in the evening, and it's him, it's the doctor, and he says, "Look," he says, "I usually don't do this," he says, "but he said, I think you should turn on the news." And we turned it on, and there was an event that I had talked about, and it just announced it on television. He said, "This is right out of your notes." And so he said, "I want to see you tomorrow." So I spent the next month, and he changed his whole tactic towards, going this way. And he said, "I really think that you ought to explore meditation," he says, because he says, "You're tapped into something." He says, "I'm not sure what it is." He says, "But I'm not the person to help you with this." He says, "You really need to go to a place like Stanford or some other place." And he gave me a list of places. And I ran out of money. I just couldn't work anymore. I had to stop my business. And I just I just took off. At that time I was living in Florida, and I moved back to New England, and I said, well, maybe this stuff will all stop. And it did. It stopped for about 3 months. And then one day, somebody knocked on the door and came in and said, are you Gordon Scallion? I said, yes. And they said, well, the council sent us. And I said, I beg your pardon? They said, the council sent us. And I said, oh, they're looking for money. And I said, what religious organization are you with? And they said, well, we're not. We're spiritualists, and the council sent us. And I said, well, what do you mean the council? And they said, well, do you know about spiritualism? I said, no. And they said, well, this person here, and he introduced me. He said, this person's a medium, and he communicates with people on the other side. And I went, oh God, So I was not going to let him in the door, and I didn't. I kept him at the door. And they said, we know you're going to have a hard time accepting this. He said, but he says, you're only aware of who you are now. You're not really aware of who you have been. And once you know who you have been, you'll understand why that woman came to you in the hospital, why you see the 3 screens. And I hadn't told anybody other than the doctor about these things. They knew it all. And I just totally lost it right there. And I let them in, and they spent like an hour with me and gave me some books to read to get started, and told me that I really needed to go and figure out who I was before. And what they were referring to, of course, was reincarnation.
Yes.
And so the reason that this was all happening to me is because I had experienced this before. I had gone through a similar time period in history about 12,000 years ago when there was a great change in the planet, and continents literally sank. And I did not I knew it was happening, and I just didn't do enough about it. And so my soul, if you will, was crying out to say, put it out there. You're going to have to develop a tough skin, forget the business world, and forget, things that you thought were important, and just do it. And so I eventually worked, and I was able to, access that part of me in the past, and I understood, why me, why I was doing it.
That's a remarkable story, and listeners, I'm sure a lot of you must have been aware of the similarities between that story and my own story. And it always happens like this. When people are called in this way, there's a certain pattern that falls together where suddenly their paradigm is shattered, in Mr. Scallion's case, by suddenly becoming unable to speak and then having an experience of higher mind. In my case, an alien abduction or whatever you want to call it. And then this meeting is absolutely fascinating, because I had a similar meeting. I met a man I call the Master of the Key that I've written a little book about. I've basically done a transcription of our conversation. It was very similar, and I had a very similar reaction to him. I wouldn't let him into the room, and then he said some things so remarkable I couldn't help but do it. Was there ever any follow-up? Did you get to know these people at all?
I got to know one of them only in the sense that they left and they knew that I really didn't want to see them again. I didn't say that, but they just knew. They just said, our job was to give you this message and leave. If you ever want to reach us, here's how you can reach us. And then they left. And I had never had any intentions of reaching them again. I just was having a hard time even accepting what they were saying. And I think I was more terrified at that moment than I was when I lost my voice and saw the visions, because now it was very real. At least before I could blame, chemicals or something. But one of the people that came, he returned back about a month later, and all dressed up, had a suit on, man in probably in his 60s, 70s, and he had another man with him. And he said, hi, do you remember me? And I said, yeah. And he says, can you help my friend here? And I said, well, no, nothing I could do. I'm still struggling. And the short of it is that he came in and he said to me, if you just put your hand on this man, you'll be able to tell me what I can do to help him, because he's not well. And I refused to do it. I just said, that's not me. You need to go someplace else. And he really reached over, grabbed my hand, and took my hand and put his hand on the man's hands. And they were both just sweet elderly gentlemen. And And I saw it, and he says, now just tell me what you see. He says, let those movies come out of you. Don't stop them. And I said, I can't. And he just kept saying, don't stop it, don't stop it. And then he started talking very religious terminology, you know. And so that kind of threw me for a second. And then all of a sudden, bingo, I started seeing the screens. The vision comes up. I saw a man in a white jacket, kind of the 1940s scene, and he was working in a dental lab, and I could see all these beakers with, and he says, what do you see? And I was telling him, and he says, what are you looking at? I said, there's beakers of mercury everywhere. And I said, and his skin, this man's skin is taking the mercury in, and he says, thank you, that's all I need. And then he brings me back out, and I said, whoa. And he says, well, thank you. He says, you've done more than you know. And I says, look, he says, you know, I don't know what's happening with me, but what you really need to do is you need to go to a doctor.
Right.
And he turns to me and he says, Mr. Scallion, he says, I am a doctor. This is my patient. And we both belong to this group. And so, you know, chills ran up and down my spine. So they left, you know, time forward of maybe a month or 2, 3, I can't recall. He comes back with the man, and the man is vibrant looking. He said, you were right, it was mercury poisoning. He said, you also gave us some clues of what he could do by describing what you saw and those herbs. And he's fine now, and we're going to Europe. So it turns out it was his life partner who was dying. And so that one event caused me to look back and kind of step back, and I said, well, maybe this isn't the work of the devil that's what's happening to me. Maybe there's some good in here somewhere. Because up to that point, you know, all of my Catholicism training, altar boy training, was saying that, you know, I may be in some place I shouldn't be, you know, like some demonic place, you know, purgatory, hell, something. I didn't know. But I began to have a different feeling about what was happening. And it was at that time I then started writing everything down. And more people started coming. And then for several years, probably 8-10 years, you know, we'd wake up in the morning and there'd be Winnebagos out in our yard from Canada, people from Australia. There were thousands of people over the period of the next years. And then finally, about the year 1987, 1988, I just started getting sick. I started having headaches and I couldn't stop them. And I finally realized that I just had to stop doing what I was doing on a one-on-one basis. And we just stopped. And then the headaches went away. And then I had a dream, and the dream said, what you need to do now is to simply share what you see in the future and share the options that you see for people. And I did that. And that's where I am today. I haven't changed since that time period.
Well, we are coming up on a break right now, and you know you can go to matrixinstitute.com, and there are things you can do there. One of the most important things you could do there would be to subscribe to the Institute's Intuitive Flash. If you want to get into Gordon Michael Scallion, obviously an extraordinary man, and you can get a great deal on Mr. Scallion's book, Notes from the Cosmos, if you subscribe. So do go to matrixinstitute.com. It's very well worth getting into this. Join him on a remarkable human journey. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back with Gordon Michael Scallion. We have been talking about his personal journey, which was a truly extraordinary one, and one that has a parallel, of course, in my own life and in the lives of many other people who have ended up being, having their tails kicked onto these paths. Gordon would be about the best way to put it, at least in my case, and it sounds like you weren't too different from me in that respect.
I call it the 2x4 effect.
Right, exactly.
Takes a 2x4 and hits you upside the head, and that's the only way they can get your attention.
Right. Well, apparently we all got reincarnated with similarly thick skulls, thank God. In any case, now I want to go on, though, because there is a huge question. A lot of us have had for a long time, like you have, the feeling that changes were on the way. Now we're actually seeing this is unfolding. As I speak, there is a an extraordinary weather situation developing over the United States. There were tornadoes in Brazil for almost the first time in living memory last week. There are now routinely tornadoes occurring in England in the winter. There are so much change going on. Earlier today, we had struggles with this interview because of the extremely violent weather here in Los Angeles right now as we talk. So I have to ask you about insights for us. How should we prepare?
Well, one of the things that I've done is that, we can listen to, volcanologists and geophysicists and sensitives and intuitives and, people like myself. There's a lot of people out there saying very similar things, but they're saying them somewhat differently. But if you look at what the issue is that we're into changes, and these changes are accelerating. They're not stable. They're not decelerating. They're actually increasing. And one of the things that I've done is on my website I've put a meditation room, and if you go there's no charge. You can click on it and you can watch this meditation. It's less than a minute. It's a kind of a special light show that I was shown in one of my visions from my past life self in Atlantis. Showed me how to draw and make this mandala in certain sounds, and so I created it and put it on there. And if you go and watch that, and you can repeat it, you can leave it on a loop so you can listen to it as often as you want. But you listen to it even for 30 seconds a day, and it will change you. It's amazing the responses we've had from this, and as these changes increase, two things happen with us. One is we become more fearful. When we become more fearful, we shut down the abilities that we need, our intuitive faculties. So we need to understand that change is part of what our world is like, but what we want to know is how we can move through these changes, how we can know where to go, what to do, what we can do to be in service, what we can do to fulfill our life, our family, our children, our parents. And so those answers can only come from within. We can talk to, 1 million people, get advice from 1 million people, but in the end, we have to make certain decisions. I'm hopeful that the thing I can contribute is some tools that will enable people to better access their inner mechanisms of knowing and thereby be prepared for whatever happens in your life.
Well, this is valuable advice to me personally because it's something I definitely need to do. I have a good intuitive sense and strong psychic hits. Just yesterday I had an appalling one where I was suddenly found myself being suffocated in chlorine gas, only to find 10 minutes later that a chlorine gas accident had occurred in a town in the southeast, I believe in South Carolina, and people had been killed. But that isn't really helpful. In fact, what it is it makes you feel, gee, I could do better than this, and maybe I could really get this in focus. So that's the kind of thing I think that many of my listeners are in the same boat, and maybe we should go to matrixinstitute.com and try to get into focus using the meditation link. So I'm going to certainly do that myself. Now, let me ask you this. There's a feeling out here in California of waiting for another shoe to drop. I don't personally feel a sense of an earthquake on the way here at all. My focus is on volcanism. And does that make any sense right now?
Well, it is. Of course, we have some knowns, and the knowns that we have right now, there's two things that are going on. One is that Mount St. Helens became active last year, and
right.
And then the sense was that was going to blow off, and that was not my sense, and I so stated it. I said, I don't think we're going to see anything in 2004 significant, but in 2005, I do see volcanism in the Cascades. Now, Mount Rainier has always been one of my West Coast markers to watch for, and there's been swarming of quakes in 2004, very small, but swarming around there, so that's kind of new for that region. Not new for the Cascades, obviously. So I would expect that this year we are going to see volcanism in the Cascades Mount St. Helens is unknown. Mount Rainier, there's nothing really going on right now, but I think that will come to life either this year or next. So while I don't see imminent destruction in California, I do see volcanism as well, but I also see some quakes coming. But there's a window here next week. If we can get through this next week without anything significant, I think globally we're going to see some headline grabbing earth changes sometime around the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, those days. I think we're going to see some more activity in the world that's going to kind of bring a focus to it. But the West Coast, I think, is now going to start its cycle. But again, like you, I don't sense the big one coming yet. But I certainly would not say that may not be true for the year 2005.
Folks, if you want to learn more about the Mount Rainier situation, go to unknowncountry.com, and you can, oddly enough, if you search on St. Helens, you will get the Mount Rainier earthquake storm story, which we published on November the 12th of last year. So now, therefore, you're not. What areas of there do you see the Indian Ocean is settling down now? Are going? Is this over yet there?
No, I don't think it's over. You can't take that kind of a movement. I mean, this thing was hundreds of miles long, in land thrusting. So it relieves some of the pressure that's going on. But one of the things that the scientific community has not come together with yet is a theory that I propose, which is I call it the puzzle theory. If you have a puzzle and you put this puzzle together, let's say it's a circular puzzle, and you try pushing two of the pieces together, you're going to, for sure, move the other pieces. And so the tectonic plates, I think, are that way. When you put one and reposition it, as what happened, in Indonesia, in the Indian Ocean area, it's got to push the other quakes. It's got to affect them in other ways. So my sense is that we're going to see more activity, not necessarily. I think we're going to have more aftershocks in the area. I don't see anything as devastating as that was there, but I do see other areas. I would in particular, Iceland is an area that for some reason just keeps coming into my visions. And I would say that 2005 is going to be the year of the volcano. I really see a lot of volcanism undersea and above ground. So I think that, we're going to see changes there that are going to, again, bring focus. As more and more water, melts off, we're changing the landscape of the planet. And heat is what drives the melting. Heat from volcanoes, heat from fossil fuel use, global warming. But global warming is only a part of it. It is not the total cause of it. Natural earth changes, I think, are the main contributor to this.
Do you think that the sun plays a role in it as well?
Absolutely. The sun, I've been, for probably 50 years, I have been studying the sun. I did it in my electronic days as a ham radio operator, which I still am. And so I would study the activity of the sun because it affects communications. And so knowing when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, what the cycles are, can give you, exciting windows to communication skills. So I grew up with it. And what I've found is that the Earth and the sun kind of talk to each other. Whatever happens on the sun, we think that, we're getting the rays from the sun, we're getting the heat from the sun. What is not generally understood is that whatever's going on the Earth returns back to the sun. So, for example, if we do a lot of nuclear detonations, there's a lot of hatred, a lot of wars. Anything that changes the electromagnetic field of the Earth, alters it in any way or shape, feeds back to the sun. So, and the sun itself goes through a cycle just like the Earth does. We know scientifically that 12,000 years ago, ocean levels were 300 feet higher.
Right.
We know that. So it's not uncommon, and we also know that there's a grand precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year cycle, where the sun goes through this massive cycle, we go through it. So we're in that cycle right now. So it doesn't surprise me that we would return back to a time period of 12,000 years ago. And, the Maya tracked the sun, and as part of their calendar and their predictions is all based on certain ages, all based on the sun. So there's a lot of, and the Chinese too. So it is a source of not only of life, but it's also a source of transformation.
Gordon Michael Scallion, an extraordinary vision of the world, an extraordinary vision of the cosmos. It has been really an extraordinary experience listening to you and talking to you. Folks, I don't think you often get to hear this man speak so intimately about the origins of his own powers, and they are remarkable powers. His website is matrixinstitute.com. Intuitive Flash. Now you know why you need to get that newsletter. Notes from the Cosmos, his fabulous book. Do not miss any of this, and don't miss that meditation room. I must say I have not been in it myself. I will be going in it. I think you should too. This is something that we need, because we ask him the question, what can we do? He's got a great answer for us. MatrixInstitute.com. I'd like to thank you so much, Gordon Michael Scallion, for spending this time with us.
It's been my pleasure, and my blessings to you and to your audience.
One reporter who loves mysteries is radio's leading science journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. She's an Emmy Award-winning TV producer, documentary filmmaker, and writer, and the reporter and editor for EarthFiles.com, the Internet's most respected edge science website. Today she has a report for us on the change in the rotation of the Earth as a result of the tsunami. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. You know, that 9.0 Indian Ocean earthquake that hit Sumatra, Indonesia, it was 8 o'clock Christmas morning, and it was caused by big rocky plates moving over each other more than 5 miles down at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. And those big chunks of rock were at least 500 kilometers by 150 kilometers wide. Some scientists think bigger. But that's at least 311 miles by 93 miles of rock. The Burma plate slid 50 feet closer to India. The India plate slid under the Burma plate. And normally the Indian plate has moved only 2.4 inches a year. This was 50 feet at least. When hundreds of miles of the Earth's rocky plates move against each other like that, the planet changes shape slightly, and that provoked some scientists to calculate what might have happened to the Earth's spin rate. That huge change in rock position also moved 1 trillion cubic meters of water outward from the epicenter southeast of Banda Aceh, creating the tsunami that swamped beaches from Sumatra to Thailand, Burma, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, the Maldives, Somalia, Kenya, and Tanzania. In all those countries, there have been deaths. So far, the death toll is 150,000 and rising, with thousands more missing. According to the U.S. State Department, at least 4,000 Americans have not yet been located. But on islands and land not far from the gigantic earthquake's epicenter, animals survived. And even some tribesmen on the remote Andaman and Nicobar Islands, where several thousand others died. The Scotsman National newspaper reported January 5th that when an East Indian Coast Guard helicopter flew low over Sentinel Island in the Andaman and Nicobar region, tribesmen attacked with bows and arrows. What did the surviving animals and those extremely isolated natives feel, hear, or see that made them move to higher ground before the mass of water rolled in? This week I talked with several scientists about what might have happened to the Earth's spin, why such a huge tsunami, and what animals might sense that people don't. First, the Earth's spin calculation and analysis of how much rock and water were moved has been done at the United States Geological Survey. Seismologist Lucy Jones heads the USGS office for Southern California, where earthquakes are a constant worry. I asked Dr. Jones to explain why the Sumatra earthquake could affect our planet's spin rate, and did it.
The thing to remember is that when earthquakes happen, they don't happen at epicenter. They happen over a fault surface. And it's one block of rock moving up and across another block of rock that releases shaking as one of its effects. In fact, it's a lot like snapping your fingers. When you snap your fingers, you have two surfaces. They're in frictional contact. Because of the friction pushing them together, they don't flip sideways. Until you push hard enough, you overcome the friction.
Mm-hmm.
You slip suddenly, releasing energy in the form of a sound wave. The same thing goes on in an earthquake, except for now instead of fingers, we have two big blocks of the Earth's crust, one of them moving over the other one. And every point on that surface where they come together releases energy, releases shaking. The bigger that area is, the bigger the earthquake, because you have more spots releasing energy. To be a magnitude 9, it needs to be a very large fault. And the first reports were suggesting like 1,000 kilometers. Some of the modeling going on now, maybe it's about 500 kilometers long and about 150 kilometers wide. And that big block of rock moved an average of about 10 to 15 meters during the earthquake.
And would you clarify, if I understood correctly, that it was the Indian Ocean plate that slid underneath the Burma plate?
Yes, that's correct. The Indian Ocean went under the Burma plate. Burma rides up and over the Indian plate and moves something like 10 to 15 meters, 30 to 45 feet closer to India than it was before. Now, that's a pretty big mass that's moving around because it's, over 500 kilometers long. It's a pretty big chunk of real estate, and not compared to the whole Earth, but even there you're starting to notice it. And therefore, people started speculating as to how it might have affected the Earth's spin. I mean, the Earth spinning around is just, gravitational forces, and if you really change the shape of the Earth, you're going to change the way in which it's rotating. And you don't change the shape very much compared to the whole Earth, but you do a little bit. And some calculations were made. It came out as like a couple of microseconds change in the length of the day.
So it got longer, meaning that the Earth slowed down a tiny bit.
No, I think it got faster. But it's 2 microseconds out of a whole day.
Mm-hmm.
1 millionth of a second. So it's not something that's actually been detected. It's something that people theoretically thought could happen, and that was the calculation of what it should be given the distribution, this redistribution of mass. And the mass of rock changed its position on the sphere of the Earth.
If something like this 9.0 with these two plates interacting at such a large area could affect the spin of the Earth, could it have impact on the interior of the Earth, where we think that the iron core has impact on our magnetic fields?
We would not expect it to have an impact because that's at the center of the Earth. This mass shift all happened out at the surface, and it should not have had any effect on the core of the Earth.
And is there any research now going on to determine if there have been other areas of the planet, or let's say the Ring of Fire, that may have been jarred loose and that this big 9.0 might set off in the foreseeable future something else because so much rock was moved?
Okay, it's a reasonable concept to see that you might get some triggered earthquakes within a distance of 1,000 or 2,000 kilometers. On a global scale, we have never seen global changes in earthquake rates because of a big earthquake. Even the 9.5, the much bigger earthquake that happened back in 1960. On a closer scale, it's possible. And I know that there was an earthquake in Myanmar, Burma, just a few days after this earthquake, almost undoubtedly triggered by this one. A rather interesting phenomenon was that 3 days before this earthquake, there was a magnitude 8 down on the boundary down south of New Zealand, again on the edge of the Indian Ocean plate. and some discussion about whether or not that might have triggered the magnitude 9 or whether there's any relationship. At this point, there's not enough data to say yes or no. One just says, oh, isn't that interesting? There are calculations that have been made to look at how the stress changed in that area. And, for instance, there's a great Sumatran fault that runs down through the island of Sumatra that might be closer to having an earthquake now than before this other event. Our big problem is always we can say, well, the stress change would have put it closer to an earthquake, but since we don't know how long it was going to be to the next earthquake anyway, that doesn't tell us when the earthquake will happen. That's always one of our limitations. Earthquakes are basically a chaotic process, and we can look at some shifts, but that still doesn't usually give us a confident pattern.
Is it true that some Chinese seismologists have been reporting in the last 4 or 5 months an increase in a larger earthquake activity in swarms in the southern hemisphere?
Well, I have not heard anything like that. The Chinese don't run a network in the southern hemisphere, so I don't know. That might be related to this idea that there was this 8 down near Antarctica that happened just a few days before the 9. But I haven't heard anything over a longer time scale. Okay, so USGS, and you had that Southern California seismic office. You had not heard about any real increased seismic activity in the southern hemisphere? No. Prior to December 26th? No. Okay. I wonder if you could explain for listeners the relationship between the size of the rock that moves and the waves as they occur in the ocean that create the tsunami. What happens is when you move that block of rock, right, we have 500 by 150 kilometers and it moves over 20 meters, it also moves up a certain amount, and it displaces a piece of a section of water. And actually, we did a bit of a calculation of how much water was displaced, and it's almost 1 trillion cubic meters, which is so large to be difficult to comprehend. It's equal to about 20 times the volume of the Great Salt Lake, is the amount of water that got moved by the motion of this fault on the ocean bottom. So when the fault moves on the ocean bottom and it moves the floor of the ocean, that water, 20 times the Great Salt Lake, had to go somewhere else. And that's what moves out as the tsunami. So it's not a wave in the same sense of like a seismic wave or a sound wave. It's this big piece of water that's been displaced and sloshes out, and then it vibrates back and forth a bit. So essentially then, that big displacement of water as it moves is deeper and deeper as it approaches the coastline. Well, it is this big piece of water that moves out, and then as the coastline shallows, you then get a massing up of the wave. Even a big tsunami, when passes by a ship out in deep ocean, often won't even really be noticeable. It's when it interacts with the coastline that you get the really large effects. Because a tsunami is not a breaking wave, it's an sort of expanding, rapidly moving block of water. Yeah, it's this big wedge of water that used to be at the ocean floor, and now there's a piece of rock where it used to be, and it has to go somewhere else. Well, I heard that it was 2.5 hours estimated time from the moment in place of the Indian plate going under the Burma plate until the tsunami hit the beaches in Indonesia and Thailand. I believe it was about an hour and a half up to Thailand. It would have been longer to India, which is farther away. Thailand would have gotten it sooner. So when you look at Indonesia, where the earthquake happened, the tsunami also rolled over there. That's where the most of the deaths would be, and we shouldn't forget that they had a magnitude 9. I mean, probably a lot of the damage in Indonesia came directly from the earthquake rather than the tsunami. And then the tsunami would have been arriving very soon thereafter because they're very close to where it was generated. And, maybe 5, 10, 20, 30 minutes to be hitting all the places along Indonesia. And then I heard about an hour and a half up in Thailand, and then longer periods as you go farther away. No one was aware of any earthquake, seismic activity. It all seemed to suddenly be the water rising that Sunday morning. It does sound like in Thailand, people felt the earthquake, but it would have been early in the morning. A lot of people would have been asleep. And when you're a long ways away from an earthquake, all the sharp motions have already died off, and you're left with more of a rolling motion, and it's more likely that people sleep through that.
Well, as a person who's an expert in seismology, what has surprised you the most about this event?
I guess I was surprised at the way the tsunami really wrapped around islands and struck areas that I might have thought would have been sheltered. Now, this is perhaps I don't directly. I'm more usually studying earthquakes than the tsunamis themselves, and I wasn't as completely aware of that.
And I think it was also the BBC reporter who said that it was shocking to fly and realize that the water had extended for nearly 2 kilometers inland in some places, taking everything with it. Those are those bare, what they're calling those almost moonscape looks.
Well, I think that the worst devastation is, again, in places where the tsunami came in on top of the earthquake. So the earthquake had already shaken the buildings down and made them much easier to carry away.
And you think that happened more likely in which area?
Oh, that's Indonesia, right? Because along the whole coast of Sumatra, that's where the fault is. They were on top of a magnitude 9.
Right.
That level, the ground was shaking at a very high level for 5 minutes.
Wow. And that's based on your measurement technology.
Yes, right. We can see those waves. They proceeded out around the world, set off all of our sensors here across America as well as everywhere else in the world.
And it lasted for 5 full minutes.
Yeah.
And so I see from the science point of view, then buildings in Indonesia and on the islands would have been rattled royally for those 5 minutes.
Yeah, right.
And the tsunami that has sort of overwhelmed the news that came an hour to hour and a half, 2 hours later.
Well, the tsunami in Indonesia, the places that had the heavy shaking also had the tsunami right away.
I see, because it would have been traveling.
Because it would have been close by.
Yeah.
So they're shaken for 5 minutes, the buildings fall down, and then 5 or 10 minutes later, in comes the tsunami and washes away the rubble.
Right.
And it's, not surprising in that level of devastation. You have to build very strong buildings to not fall down in that sort of situation.
And that it would also explain how the tsunami could back out to sea so much rubble, leaving these vast open
Yes, because it
moonscapes.
wasn't pulling down the whole building. It was picking up rubble that had already been shaken down.
What do you think this country could do if there was a tsunami warning on the East Coast to move so many people? Are we talking about?
You don't need to move people very far. You got to get people not to be on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
And one simple thing that should be done is to educate children in school. If you are on the beach and you either feel an earthquake or the water starts behaving oddly, go for high ground.
Right.
People died because they went to look at the waves instead of moving away from them.
Human curiosity.
Yeah. And I've seen a horrible set of pictures from there where people who had all run down to the seawall to see the waves, and then horrid series of pictures as the wave came up over the seawall. And they happen so infrequently in the lives of most people,
right,
that people just don't think about, do we need to educate people on what to do in a tsunami? But I think that is probably the most important thing. The water's behaving oddly, go away from the beach.
Wildlife officials in Sri Lanka reported their surprise that they did not find many dead animals, even where so many humans had lost their lives. An Associated Press photographer who flew over Sri Lanka's Yala National Park in a helicopter said that he saw lots of elephants, buffalo, and deer, but no dead animals. Yet floodwaters from the tsunami uprooted trees in the park, knocked cars over, and killed at least 29,000 people in Sri Lanka. How did the animals escape? In the United States, at the University of California, Davis's School of Veterinary Medicine, animal behavior professors Benjamin and Lynette Hart, husband and wife, have done research projects that give insight about animal survival in the face of huge seismic events. First, Dr. Benjamin Hart did a study for the U.S. Geological Survey to see if unusual animal behavior in seismically active California regions might be a reliable early warning system. The simple answer is no, because animal behavior before earthquakes is not consistent enough, which might relate to differences in quake intensities. However, Dr. Hart described for me what might be happening when many animals do react before seismic events, such as apparently happened in this Indonesia quake. Dr. Hart.
And in many cases, we had 3 or 4 hours or 10 hours prior to the earthquake, up to, let's say, 1 hour prior to the earthquake, that unusual animal behavior was reported. And when we talk with our geophysical colleagues about what animals could be responding to, if it's not foreshocks, we try to eliminate that by the use of our interviewing techniques. If it's not the foreshocks, it could be when the plates rub against each other, they produce subsonic emissions. Mm-hmm. And those could travel a long way. Subsonic vibrations can travel quite a ways. Animals will be picking that up. They also may produce electrostatically charged particles that maybe animals could pick up on. There's a release of radon gas in some instances. So those are examples of the kinds of stimuli that animals could be perceiving. And of course, we don't have any idea which one it would be.
The 9.0 level of the Sumatra plate and India plate coming together, that might be large enough to set off these subsonic frequencies that maybe elephants and other animals in the islands responded to?
Oh, that's exactly right. So if you get 9, I mean, it's logical, to me at least, that an earthquake of that magnitude is going to be, prior to the earthquake, the stress on the plates is going to be much greater than a magnitude 6 would be. And it's the stress, it's these plates coming against each other and pushing that produces these precursor stimuli. It's logical to think that the precursor stimuli will be stronger. One of the things that we learned on our study was that the behavior of the animals, irrespective of species, is not bizarre or abnormal. It's normal behavior to a frightening stimulus.
Right.
And the precursor would be a frightening stimulus that there's no explanation for, and that's what they do. And for many animals, it's fleeing or escaping. Some it's freezing. Some it's going to, where instinct says, I need to go for protection. So if it's elephants, let's move out of here.
The intelligence and highly sensitive nature of elephants has intrigued Dr. Hart's wife, Dr. Lynette Hart, who is professor of animal behavior and human-animal interaction in the Department of Population Health and Reproduction at the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. She has studied the way elephants vocalize through the air. But not only can elephants trumpet loudly and run quickly, Dr. Hart thinks the animals perceive sound frequencies from seismic events that humans cannot hear, frequencies that are subsonic and coming into the elephant. Dr. Hart.
One of the questions that we have pursued is the fact that such a large sound as an elephant makes when it vocalizes is going to also create a seismic wave in the earth. And a question that we are very interested in is to what extent are elephants cueing on seismic propagation, on things that are going on in the earth, in addition to acoustic responses with propagation through the air.
I see. So that a response that might come from another elephant in the long distance, elephants may have wired in their physiognomy and in their brain the ability to pick up subsonic frequencies.
That's right. They might be able to integrate both information that they would receive through the earth and information they would receive through the air. And by combining that information, be able to make a better judgment about the direction of a sound or the intensity of it or how far away the source of the sound would be.
Would the elephants be perceiving these subsonic frequencies through their feet?
Well, this is one question. Their feet, of course, they have a large fat pad on the surface. The bottom of an elephant's foot actually feels quite a bit like a water bed if you push on it. So it makes a very good compact feel with the earth. And in work that's still unpublished, we have started looking at the anatomy of the foot, and we see that there are some fine pressure receptors in the foot. It's also been published by Betts Rasmussen that the trunk has extensive pressure receptors in it. So they have the capability of resting the trunk on the ground, and they would be able to feel vibrations on the earth. The Bombay Natural History Society Journal had published a number of accounts of elephants having very strong reactions to earthquakes and or responding prior to the earthquake. If you think about this earthquake being at 9 points on the Richter scale, that's just virtually an off-scale extent of earthquake, and that earthquake would create a huge seismic wave and once a seismic wave like that is propagated, it has a characteristic that it continues to be propagated, so it will go a vast distance.
One of the reports was that elephants even grab children and adults with their trunks and save them in this terrible earthquake and tsunami.
Yes, Linda, and we published on unknowncountry.com a number of stories about this, about three really, about the fact that some of the primitive people living in the islands in the Indian Ocean were also forewarned, which would suggest that it was something other than the pads on the elephant's feet. There was an awareness, like the Morgan gypsies knew immediately from the way the sea was acting, what was happening from their long tradition of experience with the ocean. So there were people and animals who were in touch with nature. There was even a little English girl on a beach in Thailand who warned everybody on the beach that a tsunami was on the way when the sea began to change, because she recognized the signs from a lesson she'd had in school before Christmas.
Wow. And I had mentioned earlier the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, where the tribesmen tried to shoot bows and arrow at the helicopter.
Right.
But it was such a relief to the Indian military in that helicopter that they were alive, and the link was they assumed that there was something that the natives watching the animals and watching the water had picked up on and had gone to the highest ground, and that they had saved themselves when others could not.
When others could not, exactly. And it goes to show you how important it is to remain in touch with nature, which is, of course, one of the great themes of both my website and my radio program, that we need to get back in touch with nature. Because I always say to these people who write me these angry letters about this and that, about that global warming isn't real or whatever, that nature is math. 2 and 2 always equals 4 in nature. We like to pretend it equals 4.6 or 3.5. It ain't so, and this event is an example of it.
And when you try in your mind's eye to contemplate 1 trillion cubic meters of water suddenly displaced by that much rock, it gives me a sense of humility in the face of nature and this great planet that we're on. These are huge natural forces. The planet has been changing for 4.5 billion years and will continue to. And when something like this happens, it shows we really, really have to pay attention to nature, and we are not in control of it.
Not at all. Not at all. Linda Moulton Howe, thank you very much for a great report. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland.
Letters and emails to our institute than this issue that you're talking about. We get a lot of correspondence, of course, for people wanting to know what the future is like, but that number is not as large as the number of people who are feeling unsettled. And there's a peak to these things, that they kind of reach a crescendo, then drop off. And I've noticed the cycle over 25 years. And it seems that typically anywhere from a few minutes to as much as a week before a seismic event or a stellar event, such as a a aurora borealis, northern lights effect, or some kind of a passage of a comet, certain lunar aspects, the sunspot cycle. All of these things seem to trigger Earth energies that are moving through all of us. And just prior to, like I said, up to a week, these things get amplified. And the animals are the first to react to these kind of things. So I have several veterinarians and people who work at animal hospitals who are in contact with me, and they feed me data and actually see the trend. So we react to these things. Now, this energy is always flowing through us. It's not like this energy comes and goes like on our birthday. It's constantly, 24/7, passing through our bodies.
Is there any way for us to kind of pick up on what is happening with animals, like when cats and dogs all start disappearing, for example, before an earthquake?
Well, animals in China in particular, they use certain animals as indicators for seismic event. It's one part of a battery. It's not the only thing they depend upon, but they do look at it. And there's lots of research going on. Animals, because they are in survival mode always, are very attuned to what's going on about them. They're not clouded with all of the emotional baggage that we all have. And so for us, in order to get a clearer sense about where we are and what's going on around us, we have to kind of pull back and take a few minutes each day to kind of get centered. Now, the simplest things to do would be, a few minutes of meditation will do it. Prayer does it. But, sometime every day, pick a time. And I recommend taking 7 minutes. I have found that's a magical number. And if you do it every day at the same time, just sitting quietly, so you kind of tune everything out, it kind of sends a message to our subconscious mind that says, this is a time period for attunement. This is contemplation. This is where my time period to get back in touch. And the benefits, of course, are is that we will reduce our stress and we'll open our intuitive channels up to get more of the answers that we're all searching for. But at the same token, it will also kind of tune our physical bodies to become more aware of what. But when it gets amplified, the strength of the forces that are moving through our body increase by a factor of 10, 100, 1,000. And as it moves through our body and up our spinal column, whatever part of our body is not in balance, we tend to carry our stress, most of us, in our neck and shoulders and lower back. We tend to have headaches and migraines at a pattern and a frequency we don't understand. But if we look at some of the data of quakes and other events that I spoke about, we'll see that there is a pattern here. And this pattern is triggering us. Now, we are in a cycle window of unprecedented changes in our Earth. We see it with weather. We see it with volcanism. We see it, the most recent horrific event in the Indian Ocean. And all of these things are pointing to even greater events to come. And therefore, I fully suspect that more and more people are going to be reporting these physical sensations.
Well, it's interesting that animals, like here in California, people always seem to rely on their animals to warn them of impending earth changes. And of course, in the recent event in the Indian Ocean, the animals reacted and moved to higher ground while people were oblivious to it, except for the Morgan Gypsies and some of the Andaman Islanders who were living in very traditional ways and sensed something immediately. Now, tell us, Scallion with us, Gordon Michael Scallion is a legendary figure, a futurist, a teacher of consciousness studies, the author of the best-selling book Notes from the Cosmos, a futurist's insight into the world of dream, prophecy, and intuition. His website is matrixinstitute.com. He started out in electronics, and in 1979, he experienced a health crisis that changed his life. And later on, you will hear probably more about what happened to Gordon Michael Scallion then than you ever have before. Many of the insights documented in his book and in Intuitive Flash come true to such an extent that he's become a legend. And in fact, back in 1994, he was already warning about what was going to happen in the Indian Ocean and saying that this would open a door to future Earth changes. We'll certainly be talking about that. Welcome to the program, Gordon Michael Scallion. I had a whole list of questions for you, but I was so fascinated by something I saw on matrixinstitute.com, your website, just a few moments ago, about physical sensations. There are among them me and many other people are having strange physical sensations right now. A reader of the Intuitive Flash of your newsletter wrote in about lower back problems and strange pains and relating them to Earth changes, in my mind, for the first time. Could you talk a little bit, expand a little bit on this?
Sure. Probably no other subject has driven more what's around us and what's happening.
I've heard that classified ads for dogs and cats, lost animals, lost pets, are an actual indicator of an impending earthquake. Is that true?
It is. There's a lot of research, especially in California. There are several people who are tracking lost pet classifieds. So they may look at 100 different classified ads. And the first place that people do when they lose a pet is they post an ad, lost my pet cat or dog or whatever. And so you can see those things will spike up. And when they spike up, it's an indication or a trend that something is going to happen. Now, we don't know where, we don't know the magnitude, we don't know the date, but we know that we're in a window of it. So it's kind of like an indicator. The higher the number of lost pets, the more we can look at the classifieds in a specific area. We can draw some conclusions, though admittedly it's still very, very relative. We're just saying that here in Southern California we're getting a lot of this, so therefore an event might be occurring in the very, very near future in Southern California. But it's just one more piece of a battery of equipment. Now, the earthquakes that occurred in the Indian Ocean, there are actually two. There was first an 8.4 that occurred south of Tasmania toward the Antarctic, and then a couple